Tone King Imperial MKII amp sim was Neural DSP's real first step into those classic and vintage guitar tones we all know and love. It's a really great plugin. It's really popular. In fact, it's been my #1 amp sim ever since it came out. However, they've recently released the Morgan Amp Suite, which is also aimed at reproducing those classic and vintage guitar tones. So that begs the question, is the Tone King still king? Has the Morgan Amp Suite come and knocked it off its pedestal? Also, if you're looking at getting one of these, which is going to work best for the way you play and your workflow? So let's check out some sounds, compare the features, and see which one's going to work best for you. Okay, so as I mentioned, both these are going for that kind of classic vintage guitar thing, and at first glance, they may look like they have quite a bit of overlap, but in reality, they actually sound quite different, and there are actually quite a few different features in each one as well. So let's go ahead and start with the most obvious place to start, the amps themselves. All right, so I got these pulled up on my screen, and we're gonna start off with the Tone King Imperial MKII, and this amp sim has just one amp in it. However, it does have 2 channels on that amp, and these 2 channels can be quite different from each other. So the rhythm channel is going to be more of a Fender black panel kind of sound, and then the lead channel is going to have a whole different mid-range thing going on, and it can be quite a bit more like a Fender tweed sound. So while just one amp, there's a ton of distinct tones and sounds you can pull out of this with the 2 channels. All right, taking a look at the Morgan Amp Suite, we actually have 3 amps in this one, but each amp is just a single channel. So first up we have the AC20, which, as you can probably guess, is going to be more of a Vox kind of vibe going on there. Next up is the PR12, which is going to be more of a Fender Princeton kind of thing. And then we have the SW50R, which is supposed to be more of like a high headroom, clean Dumble kind of sound. And each of these 3 amps do sound quite different from each other. All right, so let's check out some sounds from each one of these amps. We'll start with some cleans, then we'll crank up that input and start getting it into overdrive territory. right, let's take a look at the pedals. On each of these, there are pedals that are in front of the amp and pedals that are after the amp. Start with the ones that are in front of the amp. Again, looking at the Tone King first, we have a wah pedal here, which is kind of cool if you're into wah. This can be MIDI mapped, so if you have an expression pedal that does the whole MIDI thing, you can actually do that, so you can use your foot to control it. Or if you don't have that, it does have an auto wah feature built in. The Morgan amp suite does not have a wah pedal with it. All right, continuing on down, on the Tone King, we have 3 pedals. We have a compressor pedal, and we have an overdrive 1 and an overdrive 2. I'm not exactly sure which these overdrives are supposed to be. The overdrive 1 is kind of green colored. It doesn't really have tube screamer kind of controls, so take from that what you will. Looking at the Morgan amp suite, we actually have 4 pedals on this one. Again, we have a compressor, which has the same kind of controls. This one seems to be a bit more aggressive than the one in the Tone King, which I kind of actually like the more aggressive one. Then we have overdrive 1, which is also green, and this one is more tube screamer-like. As you can see, we've got this standard 3 controls here, and it sounds more like a tube screamer to me. Then we have our second overdrive pedal here. Next up is we have a tremolo pedal. The nice thing about this trem pedal is that we can actually set the rate on our own if we want, like you would on a regular pedal, or we can actually sync it to our recording project if we want. As you probably noticed, the Tone King didn't have a tremolo pedal with it, and that's because it actually has a tremolo on the amp. The real Tone King amp has a tremolo, and they've modeled that here, and it's a great sounding tremolo. I really like this tremolo. It feels very analog, has some character to it, feels very natural and smooth. So, also one thing to note, both of these are sine wave tremolos. They don't get super choppy, but they do have a good depth on them. Okay, so let's check out how these pedals sound. One quick note on the amps, I just use a really clean sound on the amp. That way we can hear the sound of the pedals themselves. I didn't worry about pushing the pedals into an already overdriven amp. The amps are really clean. All right, so let's check out what comes after each amp. And the first thing that comes after each amp is a 9-band graphic EQ. Taking a look at the Tone King, you can see we have our standard kind of 9-band EQ with the notches and all that kind of stuff. On the Morgan, we also have standard notch 9-band EQ, but we also have these high pass filter and low pass filter knobs right here, and that's a really nice, easy, quick way to do some broad tone shaping on the highs and lows. Then next up in the effects chain, Taking a look at the Tone King, we have a chorus, we have a delay, and we have a reverb. Now this chorus is a super nice chorus. If you're really into chorus, you'll probably like this one quite a bit. The delay is actually a stereo delay, and it's kind of like a bucket brigade analog thing. So as the repeats keep going, you'll hear it kind of degrade a little bit, which is really cool and really nice. I like that. Another great feature is that the left and right times of this stereo delay pedal, you can actually set the timing different on those. So as you can see here, we have a time left and a time right, and we can change those. And of course, we can turn off so we have a mono delay there if we want. We can set by milliseconds or by note value, and we can sync to tap tempo or to sync it to our project, which is really handy. And then the reverb here is a nice big full lush reverb. Taking a look at the Morgan, you'll see we only have 2 pedals here. We don't have the chorus on this one. We do have a stereo delay and a reverb. Now this stereo delay on the Morgan is more of a tape delay kind of thing. You'll see we have a tape drive setting here. And also, while it is stereo, you can't set the timing for left and right independently. We have this switch here for ping pong. So it's either a mono or you switch it and it'll bounce evenly back and forth from left to right, and then you can use the width here to make it wide or narrow that bounce back and forth if you want. We have a lot of the same other controls on here. We can set it by milliseconds, by note value, the tap tempo, or our recording session. The reverb over here has the same controls as the controls on the reverb and the Tone King. However, they are definitely 2 different sounding reverbs. Both sound great, but both sound different. So let's go ahead and check out how each of these pedals sound. Okay, let's talk about the cabs. Each one of these comes with a single cab option, and it's an open back 1x12. So let's start with the Tone King. You can see here, kind of have our standard Neural DSP layout on this. We have our microphones here. We can drag those around if we want. We can change the position, the distance, mic level. We can pan them. We can turn one off just so we have one microphone or use 2. We can flip the polarity, all those kinds of standard things. A couple features that this one has is kind of unique to it. One is we have this room mic option here. So basically, if you're in a recording studio and you set some mics up in the room, like up high or whatever, and captured the sound of the amp bouncing around in the room, that's what this is doing. And so you can blend that in to kind of get a live room feel. It's kind of cool. And then, as I mentioned, this is one cabinet option, but if we look at our mic selection here, we do have two different speaker options, which is really nice. Adds a lot more flexibility. So while we don't have two cabinets, we do have two speaker options, which changes the tone up. Taking a look at the Morgan, again, we have this really standard Neural DSP. Again, we can drag our microphones around if we want, and we can change position, distance, mic level. We can pan, we can turn one off so we just have one microphone, turn it back on so we can have two. We can flip the phase or polarity, whichever one you want to call it in this case. And of course, up here we can select different microphones and stuff like that. You will notice that there is not a second speaker option. This cabinet just has the one speaker, which is a Celestion Creamback. However, it does have this dynamic 57 off axis, which puts a 57 kind of at a 45-degree angle, which is a nice option that the Tone King does not have. One thing to note on both of these, you can actually load in your own custom IR. So if you have a third-party IR or one that you created that you really like, you can load it in here and just kind of bypass the cab section altogether. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the actual interface and features available there on each of these. On the Tone King, again, we have the very standard traditional Neural DSP layout here. We can switch between our pedals, our amps, speakers, all that stuff up here. We have our input here. We have a gate knob. We can choose mono or stereo input. We're doing guitar, so obviously going to be mono. We can get our presets here, make presets, save, all that kind of stuff. Very standard there. And then we have our output here. Also, you'll notice down here, we have the option for MIDI mapping. We have a built-in tuner. If this were the standalone version, not inside of recording software, we'd also have a metronome here, which actually is really great for practicing. I use that a lot. Moving here on this one, you can actually go to the back of the amp. They modeled the attenuator and other features back there, which I don't really use, but it's cool that they did that. And then, of course, we have this here where we can select the size, and probably the best feature of the whole entire interface. If you come up here and you click the logo, you can change the color of your amp, and you can select any of the colors that the actual real Imperial Mark II comes in. I kind of like brown, whatever. It sounds boring, but there we go. Switching over to the Morgan, again, very similar, but we have some definite differences here. Again, up here, we can switch between the different sections of the plugin. We have our input just as before. We have our gate knob just as before. One nice thing is that we have this gate on and off switch, so very handy there if you want to turn it off and not lose your setting. All right, next up is transpose, which is a very cool option. You can go down a half step, up a half step, or whatever, all the way up to an octave or down an octave. I usually don't go past one or two half steps, just me personally, but it's a great option for playing and not having to retune your guitar. It tracks really well and it sounds really good, so super handy feature. And this is one I do wish the Tone King had. Maybe it'll get an update at some point. Of course, we have our input mode again. We have our presets and all that kind of stuff to save, delete. Next up, this is different from the Tone King. We actually have a doubler option here. And what this does, you turn it on and it does a left and right guitar and makes it kind of sound like two guitars are playing. Very cool feature, especially for just jamming or doing some quick demo work. And then of course we have our standard output here. If we go to the bottom, again, we have our tuner, we have our MIDI, and if we're in the standalone, again, we'd have our metronome option. This is where we change between each of the amps. Again, we can size here, we can drag this to make it smaller. And again, the most important user interface feature, if we click the logo, we can cycle through 3 different finishes, which is pretty cool. All right, so there we go. There's kind of the big overall comparison between these two. Let me know in the comments down below, Which one did you prefer? Did you like the sound of one better? Maybe you like the features of the other one better. While you're down there, check out that description and grab my free guide, 7 recording mistakes that ruin mixes. If you're using these for recording your own songs, this guide is going to give you some free and helpful tips that are easy to do, that's going to make your song sound better, bigger, and just more professional. So make sure you check that out down below. Also, do the YouTubey thing, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Check out these videos that are showing up right here. And thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.